Hello everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. We are Sarah and Mark. Today we are going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material.
All right, Mark, today's topic is a heavy one. We're looking at Edward H. Whitmore's Covert Operations, Series Brazil, and it really flips the script on how we think about conflict.
It really does. I think the best way to start is with this quote from the book that just sets the stage perfectly. Whitmore writes, "Inside Brazil, violence is not a breakdown of order. It is the order, a concealed ecosystem." I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. It's a massive claim.
It is. It completely reframes everything. Because you're right, our first instinct, especially for media reports, is to see the violence as just pure chaos. But Whitmore says, no, you're looking at it all wrong. This isn't a lack of a system. It is a system. It's an alternative, brutal, but highly organized system of power.
Exactly. And to really get our heads around that system, we've got to break it down. So here's how we're going to tackle this today. First, we'll dive right into what Whitmore calls the myth of chaos. Then we'll look at the actual power players, the main actors on the stage. After that, we'll map out their battlegrounds, which, spoiler alert, aren't always what you'd expect. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of their urban warfare tactics. And then we'll zoom out and see how this conflict has gone global, becoming a transnational issue. And finally, we'll tie it all together to understand the new paradigm of conflict that this really represents.
Okay, so let's start with that myth of chaos. You know, when you think of Brazil, you get these two competing images, right? On one hand, it's the beautiful postcard, the beaches, the festivals, the energy. But then the news gives you this other picture, just brutal, seemingly random street crime. Whitmore's whole argument forces us to question that. Is it really random? Or is that chaos just the visible tip of a much deeper, hidden war?
And this is really the core of his entire thesis. The media narrative is all about random brutality, disconnected gangs, lawless mayhem. But the covert reality that Whitmore uncovers is the exact opposite. We're talking about structured violence, coordinated hierarchies. This isn't a societal breakdown. It's the rise of an alternate order. The entire goal of his analysis is to get us to stop seeing chaos and start seeing a meticulously orchestrated system.
And he doesn't just theorize about it. The book opens with this incredible example, a huge raid in Sao Paulo. And this was not your average police bust. This was the federal police and ABIN, which is Brazil's top intelligence agency, moving in after months and months of intense surveillance. This was a calculated precision strike.
Right, and the key is what they found. They didn't just find some thugs with pistols. They seized sophisticated communications equipment, encrypted radios, stuff that points to a real command and control structure.
That one detail, right at the beginning of the book, immediately shatters that whole myth of random chaos. It's proof that someone is organizing this.
So if it's not chaos, that leads to the next logical question. Who's in charge? And this brings us to the actors. This isn't a simple good guys versus bad guys story. Whitmore describes this as a contested battlefield, with multiple overlapping powers all wrestling for control. It's a landscape of truly fragmented authority.
And player number one, you have to start with the Primeiro Comando da Capital, or the PCC. And we need to get the image of a simple street gang out of our heads. This is a criminal syndicate. And get this, it was literally born inside a prison, forged in the fire of a massacre, and its top leaders still operate from inside maximum security prisons, directing a massive network of operatives on the streets. It's almost like a corporation with its board of directors in permanent lockdown.
And then, on the other side, you have the militias. And this is where things get really murky and complicated. These are often made up of former and even current police officers and military personnel. They're not just another gang. They provide what Whitmore calls shadow governance. In the neighborhoods they control, they are the government. They tax businesses, control utilities, and act as a parallel justice system. It completely erases the line between the state and the criminal underworld.
And that brings us to the third major player, the state itself. But notice how Whitmore calls it the fragmented state. That's key. Because yes, you have dedicated federal agencies and intelligence units trying to fight back, but they are constantly undermined by internal rivalries, political interference, and jurisdictional squabbles. And it's precisely those cracks, those power vacuums, that allow groups like the PCC and the militias to grow and thrive.
So you can really see the three-way power struggle here. You have the PCC, which is almost like a purely capitalist enterprise. Their goal is economic and territorial domination, and their method is a highly networked criminal operation.
And competing directly with them are the militias, who are playing a slightly different game. Their goal is more about local control, about becoming the de facto government through extortion and coercion. And then you have the state, trying to use the tools it knows, crackdowns, intelligence ops, to reassert its formal authority over both of them. It creates this incredibly tense, violent equilibrium where everyone is fighting to be the sole provider of order.
Okay, so we know who's fighting, but where are they fighting? And this is maybe the most fascinating part of the book for me. Whitmore argues that the real war, the one that truly matters, is not being fought on the streets we see on the news. The most important battlegrounds are the ones that are completely invisible.
And the number one invisible battlefield? The prison system. This is a mind-blowing concept. In Whitmore's analysis, prisons are not places of containment. They are active command and control centers. A PCC leader from deep inside a supposedly secure facility issues a strategic directive. That order is then smuggled out through an incredible clandestine network. Coded messages, corrupt officials, you name it. It filters down to regional commanders, and then, boom, you get a perfectly coordinated series of attacks on the outside. The entire command chain is invisible.
And running right alongside that, you have the digital battlefield. This is a silent, constant war for information superiority. The PCC, the militias, and the states are all locked in this relentless intelligence battle. They're using encrypted apps, conducting counter-surveillance, trying to infiltrate each other's networks. In this kind of war, controlling the flow of information is every bit as important as controlling territory.
And that brings us to how all this invisible command and digital warfare actually manifest on the ground. How does it translate into violence? The book uses the police raids in Rio's favelas as a perfect case study to break down the tactics of this really unique form of hybrid conflict.
Yeah, and the tactics are incredibly sophisticated. We're not talking about disorganized brawls. These groups operate in decentralized cells, which means if you take one out, the larger network survives. They employ classic guerrilla tactics, using the dense, complex, urban terrain of the favelas to their advantage.
Absolutely. They have extensive networks of lookouts and informants. They build fortified positions. But what's really smart is that they're not afraid to retreat strategically to preserve their forces. They'll melt away when the police come in heavy, only to regroup and launch a coordinated counterattack later. It's how a less powerful force can effectively neutralize a state's overwhelming superiority in firepower.
But it's not all about bullets and barricades. A huge part of this is psychological warfare. Violence isn't just a means of combat, it's a tool for social control. These groups use public, brutal punishments to create an atmosphere of fear. But, and this is the genius of it, they also provide services that the state can't. They'll fix the electricity, provide security. They mix pure terror with this twisted form of community governance, which makes them, in a very real way, indispensable to the people they control. Okay, so everything we've talked about up to this point has been focused inside Brazil. But here is where the book makes a really critical pivot. Whitmore argues that this is no longer just a domestic Brazilian problem. This conflict has metastasized. It's now a full-blown transnational criminal enterprise. And when you look at the timeline of the PCC's growth, it's just incredible. I mean, think about this trajectory. It starts in a single prison in São Paulo in the 1990s. By the 2000s, it's powerful enough to basically shut down Brazil's biggest city. Then, in the 2010s, it begins a deliberate, strategic expansion across borders into neighboring countries. And today, it's operating like a multinational corporation, with key partnerships across the continent. This wasn't an accident. It was a business plan.
Exactly, a business plan. And these aren't just casual arrangements. The book details how the PCC has built deep, logistical alliances with powerful smuggling groups in Paraguay and cocaine producers in Bolivia. They are sharing smuggling routes, sharing intelligence, sharing profits. What this creates is a transnational criminal ecosystem that is incredibly resilient. You can't fight it just by focusing on São Paulo anymore. The problem has literally grown beyond the borders of one country.
So, let's try to pull all of these threads together. We've gone beyond the myth of chaos. We've identified the three main competing factions. We've mapped their invisible battlefields in prisons and online, and we've followed their expansion across South America. When you step back and look at all the pieces, a very clear pattern emerges. Whitmore's argument is that we need a whole new paradigm to even begin to understand this kind of conflict, one that recognizes the hidden order behind the apparent chaos.
And this last quote from the book really brings it all home. He says, "True control frequently resides out of sight, behind iron bars, in encrypted messages, and at the intersection of crime and governance." That, right there, is the entire thesis in a nutshell. The real power isn't the person with the gun you see on the street. It's the invisible, complex system that armed them, directed them, and put them there in the first place.
Which leaves us with this huge and frankly very difficult question. How does a traditional state even begin to fight a war when the main battlefield is invisible, and the enemy is also the entity providing essential services to the population? Whitmore doesn't offer any simple solutions, because there aren't any. But his work forces us to fundamentally rethink our definitions of war, governance, and power in the 21st century.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.